Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. This is the CFL Week 17 edition of the show. Good to be with you. We are getting down to crunch time in the CFL regular season and about as wide open and crazy a race to make the playoffs as I've seen in a very long time. If you look at the way the playoff picture is right now, you've certainly got all four teams in the East Division that are capable of making the playoffs. I would say that four of the five teams in the West are still alive to make the playoffs. I don't consider Calgary still alive after that loss last week to Saskatchewan. I think that might have been the nail in their coffin. But outside of maybe the Stampeders, and even they're not totally out of it yet, but they're in big trouble. Outside of Calgary, every other team in this league has a chance to make the playoffs. Even my Ticats, who were left for dead about 2 months ago, somehow they are now playing their best football of the season and have a chance to make the playoffs. So it is going to be a frantic, exciting finish to the 2024 CFL regular season. And there's only 5 weeks left in the regular season. We're coming off a nice winning week last week in the CFL for me, highlighted by a sweep on Friday night, 3-0. We did grab a little bit of the Ticats and the over against the Argos. Huge win for them. My best bet on the show last week was Saskatchewan. I didn't hide it one bit. That was my favorite bet on the board last week, them beating them against Calgary, and they got the job done. I said if they're finally going to snap this winless drought and winless streak, it was going to be that game against a beatable Calgary team, which is now dead last in my own CFL power ratings and dead last in the league right now based on their record. That franchise has fallen apart. Dave Dickinson's lost it. Forgot how to coach, forgot how to manage a game properly, forgot how to recruit quality players too. I mean, they're just not the quality players, we have seen from this Calgary team. And it's a great segue because they're on the bye this week. So we'll get right into it with Calgary. They're just a bad football team. I mean, I said it last week. That's why I thought Saskatchewan was going to get their shit together and use Calgary as a stepping stone to get right, get well, get off the schneid, and get back in the win column. And that's exactly what happened. Saskatchewan was in control for most of that game. Calgary's defense has been horrible all season and especially lately, and they could not stop the Rough Riders, could not stop the run game, especially because Reichwell Armstead, the new addition to the backfield for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, what a fucking debut that he had for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders in that game. He did whatever he wanted against that Civ Calgary defense, which just had no answers against the run last week. And Calgary had no answers against the, what I feel bad for, believe it or not, because he was probably the best Calgary player on the team last week, even in the loss, 37-29 to Saskatchewan. It's a guy I criticize a lot, and that's Jake Maier. He actually played a really solid football game. Now, he did throw the back-breaking killer interception at the end, which is more so on Dave Dickinson, his fault, than Jake Maier. Why on earth, with the best fucking short yardage quarterback in the CFL, it's been automatic you get 3rd and 1 when you put the big man from Mississippi State, Tommy Stevens, in there. But no, let's drop back pass on 3rd and 1 with Maier, and interception, game over, maybe season over for the Calgary Stampeders, the way that game ended. Just pathetic. Just horrible. Horseshit coaching, decision-making by Dave Dickinson. Absolutely moronic. I said that on Twitter X as it happened. Couldn't believe it. Could not fucking believe it that they ended up throwing the ball on that 3rd and 1 and not running it with Tommy Stevens, who's been one of the best short yardage quarterbacks in the CFL. But I feel bad for Maier because Maier played all right. He only had 6 incomplete passes, 25 of 31. He actually sliced and diced Saskatchewan's secondary, which is still a problem, by the way. They still struggle against the pass, the Rough Riders. And credit to Jake Maier. He kind of took advantage of that. It was a big game for Mark and Michelle. Jalen Philpott, Tyson's brother, had a big game. Reggie Bagleton was solid. He was making plays in the passing game. The problem is, though, the defense, every time Calgary would score, the defense would give it right back up and spit it right back out again. 207 rushing yards for Reichwell Armstead in his Rough Riders debut, cast off from Ottawa. And what an angle that is this week with Ottawa facing Saskatchewan. You don't think Rock Armstead's going to want to run that football right down Ottawa's throat, team that cast him aside? Now, you can say whatever you want. Something maybe happened behind the scenes, and that's what it sounds like happened. But when you get to play your old team and they released you, you're going to be chomping at the bit to make a statement. So Armstead going up against Ottawa this Saturday should be very interesting. Just from a player prop standpoint, be very difficult to turn down taking Armstead over rushing yards in that game. He's going to want to show out. He's going to want to play well against his former team. But Calgary's defense is a joke, flat out. No denying that whatsoever. Another game where they give up almost 400 yards of offense. It was just actually a game where they almost give up 500 yards of offense to Saskatchewan. 248 through the air for Trevor Harris, who was excellent. 16 of 18, very efficient. It's just a bad Calgary team. And I know they've got the bye week, and and there's a shouting match in the locker room too after the loss to Saskatchewan last week. Two players getting in an altercation post-game in the locker room after the loss. It's just falling apart. I mean, you got players fighting with the players. Dave Dickinson doesn't have a clue. You can't stop a nosebleed on defense. Jake Mayer with the costly pick always can count on that with the game on the line. What's there to hang your hat on with this Calgary team? Nothing. And I know coming out of their bye week next week, they're going to be at BC. They're going to be getting a healthy number of points. I think +8 is the current number that you can get with Calgary next week against BC. How the hell am even getting all those points? How do you trust this group right now? It's very, very difficult to. We'll see how that. And plus, keep in mind, that's +8 against a BC team that we're going to get to this in a moment. Hasn't been that same dominant ATS team this season, particularly at home. So it's going to be interesting to see if Calgary can come out of the bye week and show something. But it kind of felt like that loss to Saskatchewan was the last straw. That if you wanted to make anything of this season and try to entertain the notion of you being a playoff team, you pretty much had to win that game against Saskatchewan last week. They didn't, and I really worry about the body language, the mentality. I worry that the locker room might be fractured a little bit now. There's just a lot of worrisome signs I have on the field and off the field for this Calgary Stampeders team. And even coming out of the bye week, I think it would take a leap of faith for me to want to bet on them and put money on them right now. So that's Calgary. They're on the bye. Let's get into Week 17 now. The other 8 teams that will be in action here in Week 17. And we will start with the first of 2 games on Friday night. Friday night football tonight. A great doubleheader. And we start with a rematch of last week. Edmonton at Winnipeg. These two teams played last week in Edmonton. It was pretty much Winnipeg in control from start to finish of that game. The Elks will be looking for redemption Friday night in the Peg. The Blue Bombers, 4.5-point home favorites, 49.5 the total in this game. So situationally, I want to take Edmonton. You got the team off a loss, looking to bounce back. Jarius Jackson's announced that McLeod Bethel-Thompson's going to start at quarterback here for the Elks in this game. We'll see how that goes, but certainly didn't go well for Trey Ford in his opportunity against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. 2 interceptions. Again, that's still where he's got to improve, is that the ability to throw the football consistently when standing in the pocket. He can throw from outside the pocket on the run. He obviously has incredible athleticism and mobility to run himself out of the pocket from the quarterback spot. But stationary pocket passer, believe it or not, is still the weakness in Trey Ford's game. And once again, we saw that last week at times. Now, they did run the football very well, including Justin Rankin and Kevin Brown, that duo. It looks like Javon Leake is going to miss this game once again for Edmonton, so they'll be without him for this one, but they have a very deep running back group, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal. On the flip side, you look at it, Winnipeg, they're playing great. They're relatively healthy now. And you look at this run they've been on, 6-0 straight up, 5-1 against the spread since August the 1st. 2 wins against BC, a win against Hamilton. That's the only game they didn't cover, by the way, but they were 10.5-point favorites in that game. Back-to-back wins against Saskatchewan, and then the win last week at Edmonton. It's not easy to go against this team, and I'm not rushing to bet this game. I lean. It's a lukewarm, mild lean to Edmonton. I just like the idea of getting points with them off the loss last week, but we do have a team that's 5-2 at home. We do have a team that obviously is playing their best football of the year. It's not easy to make the case to go against Winnipeg right now. 8-6, leading the West Division. I think looking to really cement their standing as West Division leaders right now. They're 1 game up on BC for first place in the West. There shouldn't be a letdown. There really shouldn't be a letdown. I think the thing that you worry about with McLeod Bethel Thompson is the lack of mobility against Jefferson and the pass rush that Winnipeg can bring at you, and the fact that Winnipeg, for this great run they've put on, it's been not only their run defense, their pass defense, their secondary. I've said it before. Trey Ford's brother, Tyrell Ford. Everybody talks about Trey Ford. People need to start talking about Tyrell Ford. This guy's one hell of a fucking defensive back. He has been really good in that secondary for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a Bombers team that ranks now first in the CFL passing yards allowed per game. They still can give up yards on the ground, and we saw that last week, but their secondary's been just locked down, shut down, and it's been very difficult to make plays. And my worry on the road in a loud, raucous environment, they've already announced it's going to be a sellout in Winnipeg Friday night, is that McLeod Bethel Thompson, they goad him into a couple mistakes and a couple interceptions. And we know McLeod Bethel Thompson still has them from time to time. 19 touchdowns this year, but 9 interceptions as well. So for me, it's a lukewarm lean to Edmonton, but it's nothing I'm super strong on. I felt Edmonton was in the better spot to beat Winnipeg last week. This week we'll see, but I like the idea of, Edmonton's been a decent road dog at times, losing last week. They were able to run the football against Winnipeg, and we have seen a Winnipeg letdown from time to time. The Hamilton game stands out where, if not for a late touchdown drive in the final minute by Zach Collaros, they might have lost that game to the Ticats. So it's not totally a sure thing that Winnipeg's just going to roll in here after beating Edmonton last week and roll them again and win by comfortably here in this game. I do lean a little bit to Edmonton. I mean, at this point with the totals in Winnipeg games, I'm just about under or pass every week until proven otherwise. Winnipeg continues to be just a huge under team, 12-2 to the under this season. If you look at the head-to-head meetings, yes, the games in Winnipeg at times have been high scoring, but with McLeod Bethel Thompson at quarterback, dink and dunk passing, it's not like Winnipeg is marching the ball up and down the field and scoring points in bunches. So, it's difficult to bet Winnipeg overs. Let me just put it that way. All right, Friday night, the second game, my Hamilton Ticats. Wow. Could they be the hottest team in the CFL right now? They're certainly one of the hottest teams in the league. They go to BC, to the West Coast, to take on the BC Lions. BC 7-point home favorites, 53 the total in this game. Here's what I would say to you. If you have not been betting Hamilton the last few weeks during this 4-0 against the spread run, 3-1 straight up during this span, but 4 straight point spread covers, the 3-point loss to Winnipeg on the road, and then the 3 straight wins, 2 of them against Toronto outright as underdogs, and then they beat Ottawa at home outright as an underdog. If you have not been riding Hamilton and not been betting on Hamilton the last 4 weeks, I'm not sure I would say to jump on the bandwagon here. But if you have been betting Hamilton these last few weeks, like I have, I think you can come back to Hamilton here +7 or 7.5 and keep riding this team until they fail to cover or fail to cash a ticket for you. There's no doubt the confidence is sky high. And it starts with the quarterback, Bo Levi Mitchell. Have not seen him play better in a Ticat uniform than he has the last 3 weeks. He is slicing and dicing opposing secondaries. He's making the right reads. He's spreading the ball around to a plethora of his receivers. And every play, it could be someone different. Could be Tim White. Could be Stephen Dunbar. Could be Giovanni Robinson. It could be Keandre Smith. It could be Shamar Bridges. He is getting the ball out to all of his receivers. Mixing in a little run game with, previously Greg Bell, but he was injured last week, so James Butler got the start. And you've got an offense and an offensive line that's playing a lot better too. Let's tip our cap to the O-line. Wood Manzi and Brendan Bordner and all these guys. They have really picked up their game the last few weeks. They're giving Bo Levi Mitchell time to throw the football, and that's made all the difference in the world as well for this Hamilton offense. See if it continues here. It looks like as far as the injuries, Greg Bell in particular, limited at practice, questionable. You're probably going to see James Butler again. I would think you're going to see Butler too, not just because they're not sure Bell is 100% healthy, but why would you not play James Butler in BC against his old team? That'll get him fired up. That'll get him. He'll be ready to play that game against BC on Friday night. Looks like the O-line did have a couple guys banged up, Brandon Kemp included, but he's good to go. Casey Sales, was missed the last game. He hasn't been ruled out yet, which is good to see. So that's definitely some good news on the injury front. On the BC injury front, it's a mixture. It's some good news. It's some bad news. Good news is Gary Peters in the secondary is good. He'll play. He had a hip injury last week. The good news is Ben Hladek, Canadian linebacker. They've missed him dearly. He's missed the last several games. He'll finally return from his calf injury this week. Seontae Evans in the secondary questionable. The one that hurts is Alex Hollins. Shoulder injury, one of their best receivers. He will be out, so one less weapon in the passing game for Nathan Rourke, who has been named the starting quarterback indefinitely for the BC Lions. Now, BC's off a bye week, and BC's off just an absolute, I call it a no-show. I don't say just that Toronto outplayed BC. I think BC just flat out sucked from start. Were flat as a pancake against Toronto. They had the big win against Montreal on the road against the defending champs. And like I said, I thought it was a no-show by BC against Toronto. They weren't locked in mentally, physically. You would think now, after the bye week and a loss like that, they bring it here in this game. But again, bringing it's one thing. Bringing it and winning by more than a touchdown against a team that's playing as good as any team the last month is another thing. And not to mention, keep in mind the previous meeting in Hamilton, July 7th, between these two teams earlier this year. It was a game I remember because I got to meet Darsh, our viewer of the show, good friend of mine, BC Lions fan. He came down to Hamilton to watch that game. Cam Stewart, who I do Wednesday night shows with, him and Morency. That was a fun night. It was a fun night to hang with them. It wasn't a fun night for me watching that fucking disgrace of a performance from the Ticats, but it was fun to be with them. 44-28 beatdown. Hamilton's going to want some payback. And look, Hamilton's playing a lot better than they were July 7th. Who's kidding who? There's no doubt. I think it's a competitive game. I get it. Maybe BC, that was a slap in the face. They needed the game against Toronto. They wake up and maybe they take it to Hamilton again. And there have been times when Hamilton has struggled here in BC. But we also have to remember Hamilton is a 10.5-point dog in BC last year. August 26th, won 30-13 in BC. So they were able to win in BC Place Stadium last year. I'm taking the points. Again, I don't know if I would say do this if you have not been betting Hamilton the last few weeks. But if you have been betting Hamilton the last few weeks, I say keep on riding them until the train falls off, until the train goes off the tracks. So I like Hamilton here plus 7, 7.5, anything at that. Because look, I've been on them 3 weeks in a row. Why get off it now? Why get off it now at this point in time? So that's the way I see it. I was on them in the back-to-back game. I don't know. Actually, don't know if I was on them Labor Day. I don't know if I was that day, but I was definitely on them the last two games, the Ottawa game and then the Toronto game last week on the road. Now, again, back-to-back road games. You're now flying to the West Coast. I get it. Situationally, not the best, but like I said, I like Hamilton here to make this still a competitive game. BC's defense is still sketchy to me, too. They're still giving up points. That's a problem. And BC this year at home, let me bring this up because I know this home ATS record has not been nearly as good this year for BC. They squeaked out a point spread cover their first home game against Calgary, failed to cover against Edmonton at home. They did cover against the Scout. Okay, 2-1, 2-2 because they lost to Winnipeg. The neutral game. So I guess the Victoria game, if you include that, they are 3-2 against the spread at home. But gosh, a couple of those covers, the Calgary one and that one stands out like they barely got it. So the more, and by the way, BC overall against the number, they're just 2-6 against the spread in their last 8 games overall coming into this one on Friday night. So yeah, Hamilton. And for me, I know it's a high total 53, but I could only look over the total. There should be points in this game. Hamilton's offense is on fire. I still don't fully trust the BC defense. Hamilton's defense has played better, but Nathan Rourke off a stinker before the bye week with that offense. You got to think BC's offense is putting up some points here off the bye week at home, even without Alexander Hollins. So I like over the total here. I think it's a shootout. I think it's a fun game on Friday night. Lots of points, lots of touchdowns, lots of big plays. It should be a fun one on Friday night with the Ticats and the Lions. All right, Saturday. This is your CTV national televised game. Ottawa, Saskatchewan. The Rough Riders, 3.5-point home favorites, 51.5 the total in this game. I agree with the move to Saskatchewan. All they needed was one win, and you just watch and see what confidence that probably gives them. Now, I know it was against the worst team, Calgary, but they just needed a win to give them any sort of confidence. Didn't matter who it was against. And they finally got it last week against Calgary, 37-29. I think it's a great chance for them to keep the momentum going here Saturday at home at Mosaic Stadium against Ottawa. Trevor Harris was great. They now have Rock Armstead running the football, and he was unbelievable, over 200 rushing yards, and he's going to want to have a big game against the team that cast him aside, Ottawa, just a few weeks ago. I'm not big on – I don't bet a ton of CFL player props, but you got to believe Reichwell Armstead over rushing yards is probably not a bad player prop here this week in the CFL. Probably worth a look here, taking on this Ottawa Red Blacks team. He's going to want to have a big game. And if you look at Ottawa's defense, while earlier in the season in particular, it was very good, and their run defense has been a little bit better than their pass defense, you do want to be careful with that, because you look at this Ottawa team, and, the run defense, I think, could be put to the test here by Armstead and the way Saskatchewan's been able to run the football here the last few weeks. Meanwhile, Ottawa is going to turn to Jeremiah Masoli at quarterback. This is not, at least not what they're saying, Ottawa and head coach Bob Dice, but this is apparently not a performance decision. This is an injury. He was in a walking boot at practice this week. Drew Brown, clearly not able to practice, and ultimately not able to play this weekend. So Jeremiah Masoli will get the start. It'll be his second start. Now, we remember the first start he got this year, the only previous start he got in Calgary, and he leads the Red Blacks on the road to beat the Stamps 31-29. But you are talking about the worst team in the CFL. That being said, you still have to respect Masoli. He's a veteran quarterback. He's healthy now. He's capable for one game coming in there and playing well, and he certainly has weapons to work with on the offensive side of the football. When you talk about the likes of Justin Hardy, Dominique Rhymes, Jalen Acklin, there's weapons here to work with. But on the road against a Saskatchewan team playing with some confidence again, not going to be the easiest task. And I'll admit, when he entered the game for Drew Brown last week against Montreal, he was all right, Masoli, but not phenomenal by any stretch of the imagination. Here's another concern, two other concerns for Ottawa, which is why I like Saskatchewan, and the number's getting up there now, 3.5, 4, but I would still only play the Rough Riders as a home favorite here. That loss for Ottawa last week pretty much kills their chances to win the East. So now they're relegated to pretty much a second place in the division finish, or third, because I guess Toronto can still catch them. But you look at this game at Saskatchewan, they have a bye week next week, which I'm sure they're looking forward to, because they are a beaten up and injury-riddled football team right now, Ottawa. There's no debating it. Money Hunter in the secondary, although it looks like he might play. Brandon Dandridge in the secondary, knee injury, out. They've got Drew Brown, obviously, with the ankle injury. He's been banged up. He's not expected to play. There's a couple of linemen that are banged up going into this game. Again, there's multiple, actually, cluster injuries in the secondary going into this game. So there's a lot of injuries here for Ottawa going on the road after, a game that pretty much ended their hopes to win the division, losing to Montreal at home last week. And then you factor in that Saskatchewan, from an injury standpoint, look, Saskatchewan, we know their injury report's been ugly for the better part of the last month. This is as good as I've seen it for a while. Adam O'Clair, he's going to play. Jake Brammer finally is back on the offensive line, which is great. Micah Johnson practicing in full on the D-line. He's going to be back. Anthony Lanier is the big one. He's finally back from the knee injury, practiced all week. He is back. That's maybe the best D lineman they have, Anthony Lanier. He's back. Rolly Milligan, probably their best player in the secondary. There was concern he might miss this game, but he's good to go. This is about as healthy as the now, CJ Rivas is the one concern. He's played well, and he's got a knee injury. He hasn't practiced yet this week. But other than that, they're as healthy as they've been in a long time. And maybe they get Ajo, too, back at receiver. And if he comes back, all of a sudden, Trevor Harris has a nice little group of receivers to go to, including already Keyshawn Johnson and Samuel Emilus and Sean Bain Jr. and Kean Schaefer-Baker. So definitely good news on the injury front for Saskatchewan. So, yeah, I like Saskatchewan. Again, I wouldn't want to lay more than 4. I think 4 would be my cutoff, but anything less than that, Riders are nothing for me. Ottawa's too banged up. Ottawa's finally starting to come back down to earth, struggle a little bit. I think they're just looking forward to the bye week, quite honestly. All right, next up, we've got Montreal and Toronto. And this is a huge game, by the way, too, for Saskatchewan. They can't afford to fritter away games. I know they finally beat Calgary, but they've still got work to do to cement a playoff spot. Ottawa can lose this game. They're still making the playoffs because Hamilton's not catching them. And Toronto could, but if Toronto does catch Ottawa, they're still going to make the playoffs. Ottawa will finish no less than 3rd in the East. So their playoff positioning is safe, Ottawa. Saskatchewan, not so much. All right, final game for Week 17, Saturday night, Montreal Alouettes, Toronto Argonauts. Alouettes 1.5-point road favorites, 51.5 the total. I'd be careful about taking Montreal in this spot. And I know Toronto's been very, very inconsistent and erratic. And really, since Chad Kelly has been back at quarterback for this team, they are 2-3 straight up. They are 1-4 against the spread. They've covered 1-point spread since Chad Kelly has been back. But Montreal, and I said this a few weeks ago, you are going to need to pick your spots if you are going to bet on them moving forward. Because coming into this game, Montreal is 1-3 against the spread. They didn't cover against Edmonton. They had a slow start, battled back and won. They get blown out at home by BC, loses favorites. They don't cover at all, come close to covering really against Calgary, a bad Calgary team on the road, and they end up in a 19-19 tie with the Stampeders. But last week they did win and cover, and I'm not really that shocked by it. That's the game Montreal circled and said, that's the game we got to show up and put our best performance out there. Why? Because Ottawa last week, had they won that game, it's all of a sudden a race again for first in the East. That was a defining game for Montreal. That was a game that you knew they were ready for, even with some recent struggles and point spread struggles. That's why I didn't bet against Montreal last week, because I said they will want to put their best game out there against Ottawa and put this division almost to bed. And they had a solid all-around performance, 24-12. I'm still concerned a little about the offense, though. Cody Fajardo's been more of a game manager lately. Like, he's not been pushing the ball down the field as much. They haven't been finishing drives in the red zone nearly as much with touchdowns. They've been relying more on, just doing enough, settling for field goals on offense and letting the defense take care of the rest and do enough on that side. And yes, they were able to. Like, let's be real. The first points they scored last week, Montreal, was a pick 6 by Deontay Ruffin. After that, they only scored 17 offensive points against the Ottawa Red Blacks. So this offense is not clicking on all cylinders. And we know they lost a lot of injuries at receiver. Philpott out for the year. Austin Mack out for the year. But that's no excuse. You've got a good enough receiving core. You've shown it all year. Charleston Rambo and Keon Julian Grant is now healthy. Cole Speaker's been good. Tyler Snead is now back from injury that kept him out most of the year. Reggie White Jr., I don't want to hear excuses. He's got a good enough receiving core. You just need to be more efficient on offense. And I think right now the Montreal Alouettes could do a better job of that. And after the big win against Ottawa now, that pretty much, 11-2-1, it's pretty much going to be impossible now to catch them for first in the division. I could see that Montreal kind of going back into this pre-Ottawa game last week phase of theirs where they kind of go through the motions at times. They definitely went through the motions against Edmonton. They were lucky to win that game straight up. It was a horrible first half. They were good enough to overcome it. BC, they were not very good, and I think kind of that game meant more to BC, I thought, than Montreal. And then the Calgary game, same thing. I mean, they didn't bring, I think, a desperation factor that the Stampeders did, and they were fortunate that they got that game to overtime and ended in a tie. Now you got Toronto off another loss to Hamilton, their third loss to the Ticats this season, 0-3 against Hamilton, which means if the Ticats are fortunate enough to at least finish with the same record as Toronto at the end of the season. Hamilton gets it via the tiebreaker, which would go to the Ticats. I think this game matters more to Toronto, especially after the loss last week against Hamilton. And they played Montreal very well. The playoff game didn't go well, and I'm not a Chad Kelly guy. I have said this already that I don't like the amount of interceptions he's throwing. He had one really awesome game against BC a couple weeks ago, but that was a flat as a pancake BC team coming off a big win against Montreal. They didn't have it that night. But I am still not liking the fact that Chad Kelly has more interceptions than touchdowns in his 5 games. So completion rate's fine. 1,600 passing yards in 5 games, that's fine. That's actually good. But 6 touchdowns, 7 interceptions for Chad Kelly in those 5 games, that is not good. That's not good enough ball security. That's not making good enough decisions throwing the football, and that is going to have to change. Will it? Here is the question. It's not easy against Noel Thorpe's defense. We know that. And Noel Thorpe's defense made him look stupid in the East Final. And this is Chad Kelly's first shot playing Montreal since the East Final when they totally embarrassed him in that 30-20 win, which sent Montreal to the Grey Cup, ended Toronto's incredible season in stunning fashion, a complete and utter disaster that was. Not 30-20, 38-17 it was for Montreal in that East Final. 4 interceptions for Chad Kelly in that game to just 1 touchdown. If you are any sort of competitor or any sort of player that puts, everything into what they do to be the best, if you're Chad Kelly, you have this game and this opponent circled because you have some making up to do. They put you to fucking sleep in the East Final. They made you look fucking awful. They turned an MOP candidate quarterback into a joke in that East Final last year. This Montreal Alouettes defense did that to you, Chad. So if you are worth your salt, you had better step up, make your adjustments, and be ready to play the game of your life here. Because if I'm a prideful athlete and competitor, I want to beat the shit out of this Montreal team for what they did to me last year in the East Final, ending my season and making me play that bad. Let's see if Chad Kelly's got the stones and the cojones in him to show it. I kind of think situationally there's things to like about the Argos, and I hate this fucking team and I hate their quarterback. I don't make no secret about it, but I actually do think I would lean Toronto here. Look, I said this already with Montreal. You are not going to make money betting on Montreal the rest of the season. They're going to coast. They're going to go through the motions. They're going to win first in the East. They're not going to have their best. They're not going to play 4 great quarters of football every week the rest of the season. I could see maybe that coming into play here. Like I say, I lean Toronto a little bit here in this game. We've seen, by the way, 50, 55, and 55 as far as points scored in the last 3 meetings between these two teams. So 51.5 is pretty high. Toronto in the games with Chad Kelly back, only 2 of those games stayed under. The BC game still got to 50, and BC didn't do much, but the other games flew over the total since Chad Kelly's been back. Montreal, though, has kind of trended the other way, though, lately, with just the offense has been not finishing drives. So I lean over, but I'm worried about whether Montreal is going to have the efficiency and whether Chad Kelly can have a much better game against this Montreal defense that just made him look just absolutely pathetic in the East Final. So right now, leaning Argos, leaning over. I like the side more than the total, though, in this game. I just got that sense Toronto might win this game. And Montreal's big game was last week. That's the game they wanted. That's the game they were all in for. Are they all in for this one? Toronto damn well should be, because the last time Montreal came here to BMO Field in Toronto, we know what happened last November. And Chad Kelly fucking damn sure better be ready and want this game, because this will be his first time facing the Montreal Alouettes since that disaster of an East Final performance from him last year. So fascinating game coming up there on Saturday night. All right, there you have it. That is the Week 17 CFL preview here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. Hit the like button on the way out. Let's wrap it up with a best bet. Best bet cashed last week was Saskatchewan. See if we can find another best bet for you here for this edition of the show. let's take you to Hamilton and BC, and let's go with, let me see, I'm going with that over. I like Hamilton too, but I think BC and offensively and Nathan Rourke is showing up for this game. And I know Chris Jones has done great work with this defense, and they've been better. There's no denying that whatsoever. They definitely have been playing some better football under Chris Jones' tutelage since he became the DC. But I think back home here after one of the worst games you'll see Nathan Rourke and that offense play, I think BC is going to score some points here in this game. So let's go over 52 is the best number out there right now at Pinnacle. Hamilton, BC, over 52, minus 112. Let's look for points and a shootout on Friday night in the feline fight, if you will, between the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the BC Lions. So Hamilton, BC, over 52. That is going to be my best bet for CFL Week 17 here on Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ian Cameron. Have a great weekend. Enjoy CFL Week 17 and good luck. And I will be back next week for another CFL edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.